everybody, I'm Kate Cass. Welcome to our edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about Danny Phantom. Every so often, I get asked who's my favorite superhero. Now, I didn't get into Marvel and DC stuff until I was an adult, so my favorite isn't actually Iron Man or Supergirl or even Gizmo Duck. It's...
He's a phantom.
Danny Phantom is my favorite superhero and one of my all-time favorite shows. I think I was a fan before the show even debuted. I vividly remember seeing the ads promoting the series premiere on Nickelodeon and counting down the days until it debuted after the Kids' Choice Awards in 2004. I even made popcorn for the occasion. Actually, I was 10, so my mom made it. I just supervised. From then on, I was a full-on fanatic. Danny Phantom became my latest preteen fixation right alongside the likes of Digimon and Kim Possible. So I decided that for spooky season this year, to celebrate the show's 20th anniversary, we're going to look back on Danny Phantom in its entirety. For those who haven't seen it or listened to the catchy theme song, the show follows Danny Fenton, a 14-year-old boy and the son of two ghost hunters, who one day invent a portal that pierces the veil between the living and the dead because... they wanted to do the spectral equivalent of big game hunting? I don't know, it's not really explained. One day, Danny accidentally activates the portal and in the process fuses his own DNA with ghost DNA, meaning he's now half ghost. With these newfound powers and more ghosts than ever leaking through thanks to the portal, Danny makes it his mission to protect his town from the invading ghosts alongside his friends as Danny Phantom. One of the things that works so well about Danny Phantom is its strong premise and stylish approach in bringing it to life. It's one of those shows where you can pretty much start with any episode, but you get the most out of the experience if you watch in order, likely influenced by long-form storytelling these creative people grew up with, like comic books and very early anime. The former is a major inspiration for Danny Phantom particularly. The influence is clear, and comparisons to heroes like Spider-Man are pretty obvious. Danny is a teenager who gets superpowers in a freak accident that, while never stated, I'm willing to bet involves some radiation. His superhero life and personal life are constantly clashing with each other. He's the picked-on kid at school, has multiple love interests, a ridiculously large but memorable rogues gallery, and a school bully, Dash. And it looks like this. Yeah. Artistically, there's also the obvious comparison to this show with creator Butch Hartman's other cartoon running at the time, The Fairly OddParents. Hartman's cartoons have a very similar style, there's no denying that, but they're often warped to fit the needs of the show. Fairly OddParents is more comedic and situational, while Danny Phantom is more action-oriented. With more detailed and stylistic designs that not only look cooler, but allow for more elaborate posing and are never too scary despite being a show about ghosts, this wasn't Invader Zim, distinctive color palettes that change drastically when a fight breaks out, and very ambitious camera work and action set pieces. There are a lot of camera rotations in this show, and they always look amazing. This isn't like Fox adult cartoons where they all virtually look identical. All these shows stand out from each other, even if they have similar design choices, and Danny Phantom to me stands out the most among this crowd. While this is Hartman's look, a lot of the credit for that goes to character designer Steven Silver, who also did the character designs for Kim Possible. No wonder I love these so much. Another thing Danny Phantom has going for it artistically is these pulp-style title cards for every episode. These are one of the highlights of the show. There are so many memorable ones. In spite of the obvious influences though, Danny Phantom still has a strong identity of its own, indulging in a lot of familiar tropes of teen superhero shows, but has a lot of fun with it and has plenty of style and substance of its own. The key feature episodically, I think, is the variety of ghosts, all with varying designs, abilities, and can usually be integrated into the lesson of the week rather well. If you can kick some butt and learn a valuable lesson, I'd say that's making the most of your premise. Bringing these characters to life is also an incredible cast of voice actors. I mean, David Kaufman's performance as Danny Phantom has become so iconic at this point that if you grew up with this show and hear him in anything else, you're just gonna hear Danny. It is that synonymous with him. He's great with the quips, and this might be weird to say, but no one can scream quite like him. They put this kid through the ringer, and Kaufman makes sure you know that.
Oh, that's gotta hurt.
Do it again, I wasn't looking.
Other regular talent includes Grey DeLisle, Ricky Deshawn Collins, Colleen O'Shaughnessy, Rob Paulson, Cass Soucy, Ron Perlman, Cree Summers, the list goes on. Because it's a Monster of the Week show, sometimes actors will do multiple roles to help out. Especially Paulson, I swear he was every other ghost that wasn't a guest star. Speaking of which, because they have a new fun villain role to fill every week, there are a lot of amazing guest voices for Danny Phantom's roster of villains. Michael Dorn, Patricia Heaton, Perry Gilpin, Will Arnett, Peter McNichol, Brian Cox, Mark Hamill, Taylor Lautner, John Cryer, David Carradine, Eric Roberts, the late great Martin Mull, and again, the list goes on. It's an amazing ensemble cast of characters and talent. But let's take a closer look at our main cast, starting with the main hero himself, Danny. Danny appears to be an average kid who no one understands. He is a slightly below average student, he has some nerdy interests, but not enough to define his personality, hormonal towards girls in a very 2000s way, but still sees them as people, and only really seems to get bullied at school because he's just weak enough to be a target. The only strange thing about Danny is his home life. As previously mentioned, his parents are ghost hunters, which is already pretty weird, but the fact that they're kind of loud and proud about this offers Danny a regular helping of secondhand social embarrassment. This eccentric occupation officially alters Danny's life when the portal they invented gives him his powers, though in true superhero fashion, they don't know this. Honestly, Danny may have the best reason for having a secret identity I've ever heard. Usually it comes from this desire to be seen as a person outside of that persona, or out of some vague dedication of keeping the people they love safe. But Danny is terrified that if his parents discover he's now half ghost, they'll capture him, experiment on him, or straight up exterminate him. And considering how they act around his ghost side when he starts going public, it's not an unfounded fear.
I get my hands on you, I'll tear you apart molecule by molecule!
It's a pretty messed up situation when laying it all out, but these fears are something that will be addressed later in the show. As a part of the premise, it's brilliant, adding this extra level of tension to Danny trying to get control of his powers and keep the side of himself under wraps. At the same time, Danny is juggling his self-imposed mission to keep the ever-increasing ghost infestation at bay as Amity Park's only effective means of defense. Oh yeah, the town this takes place in is called Amity Park, and they go to Casper High. I always like that. It gives Danny an ever-increasing sense of responsibility and purpose that it seems like he didn't really have before the series began. Sure, he's tempted quite a bit to use his powers for selfish reasons or to create a shortcut, but a lot of his character development and growth is naturally drawn from his experiences as a ghost.
It's not your fault.
Maybe not, but it is my responsibility.
His powers serve as both an embarrassing inconvenience and represent his ever-developing maturity. He gradually develops new powers over the course of the show with a slowly increasing power scale. They're all things he's capable of since day one, he just had to tap into it and hone those skills. And Danny doesn't just unlock his potential with his powers. Fighting ghosts forces Danny to be more brave, empathetic, and resourceful. This is clear in the first episode, where Jack and Maddie invent a containment unit for trapping ghosts, the Fenton Thermos, which they can't get to work. But Danny figures out it needs something to lock on and uses some of his own ghost energy to give it a boost. This isn't the only example either. Time and again, Danny finds clever solutions to stopping ghosts and saving the day. Despite what Danny's grades might have you believe, he's not stupid. It was just hard for him to stand out compared to his eccentric scientist parents and overachieving sister. But being Danny Phantom gives him an avenue where he can unlock his full potential, even with all the obstacles that come with it and only a few select people who know it. But Danny isn't doing any of this alone. He has his friends Sam Manson and Tucker Foley by his side. Let's talk about Sam first, because a few years back I found out that a lot of people don't like her, and I don't get it. If Sam serves an overall function in the group, I'd call her the rebellious moral compass. She's a loner goth kid who is constantly transgressing the everyday life of her normie peers, but is also a wannabe activist, going on about being a vegetarian, fighting for animal rights, preaching about environmentalism and the evils of capitalism. You know, the huge. The vibe I get from people who don't like Sam is that she's annoying, pushy, and can be very selfish. And yeah, I can kinda see where people are coming from with that. Heck, in the first episode, she leads a campaign to force the entire school lunch menu to be changed to more eco-friendly meals, which everybody hates, and it leads to the group's first big ghost encounter. But watching this all again, Sam's attempts at activism come off as very true to life, at least coming from a determined teenager who, in the grand scheme of things, has little to no power to change anything. anything. With Sam, it can come off as preachy or guilting people into not taking things as seriously as she does, but I've had Twitter long enough to know that that's kind of how advocacy for beginners goes. And you gotta admire her attempts to make a change instead of just spouting the stuff with no action behind it.
I completely dig where you're coming from, but there are better ways to go about this. Start a nonprofit, organize a petition, or you could destroy things.
Turns out it's also helpful to have someone so into the gothic and macabre on your ghost hunting team. Sam contributes a lot to researching ghosts, and I like that it's a way to divide the intellectual contributions evenly among the team instead of putting it all on the one kid with glasses. Sam's outlook makes a lot more sense when we eventually meet her parents. The joke is that they're bright and cheerful and Sam revels in darkness, but it actually goes a bit deeper than that. They're not just cheerful and uptight, they're rich and privileged. Suddenly it all adds up. Sam's family is stinking rich, but instead of flaunting that at school or with her friends, she values honesty and authenticity. She's confident enough in herself and her beliefs that she doesn't need external validation. Where Sam's faults come in is how she stands by those virtues. She can be pushy, preachy, and unwilling to see people as more than what she assesses them to be. But the reason she's such an advocate and is so insistent on upholding authenticity is because she cares. She cares so much. If Danny is the spirit of the team, Sam is the heart, often making sure the others are okay and trying to lead the group towards doing the right thing. When something feels off to her, she won't be afraid to say it, and is very protective of her friends around things she feels can hurt them. She cares about the world, her friends, and especially Danny, for reasons that should be obvious to anyone with eyes and ears.
Why do we hang out with a kid who has ghostly enemies?
Because you have a crush on him?
Sam seems to me like one of those cases of people not liking some of her traits, but not taking the time to look deeper into them or acknowledging any of her good traits. I've seen this a lot with young female characters who are a bit more loud, forceful, or strong in forging their own path. And to be perfectly frank, I'm getting sick of it. These kinds of portrayals are refreshing and needed. I think all of Sam's traits, good and bad, make for a really well-rounded character. Which is more than I could say for, Tucker. I'll try not to contradict myself too much here by not looking deeper into Tucker, but while I think Tucker lacks some of the layers needed to make him as good as Danny or Sam, he's still a valued and essential member of the group. If Danny is the spirit and Sam is the heart, then Tucker is definitely the brains. He's the group's go-to tech guy, always carrying his handy-dandy PDA, yes, a PDA, remember this was 2004, that can do pretty much anything Tucker needs. Research, hacking, analysis, tracking sometimes. Tucker's a smart kid who, if the kids run into an electronic wall, he can knock it down and rebuild it to suit their needs. He's the biggest nerd of the group, his favorite food is any kind of meat, and he likes girls even though they don't like him. Really likes girls. There are occasions where Tucker, as Danny's best friend, will live vicariously through Danny when they learn about the advantages his powers give him. If you've seen any discourse on Danny Phantom in the last few years, you've probably seen this clip floating around.
You can just walk into people and take over their bodies from the inside?
Yeah, pretty much.
If you could control a girl for just about 2 minutes...
This is where I'm split. While Tucker is good at getting the group out of trouble, he's also really good at getting them in trouble or not thinking things through. He's the quickest to exploit something dangerous, cooks up get-rich or popular quick schemes regularly, and gets too wrapped up in his own shenanigans. It's fine every once in a while, especially for a 14-year-old kid, but it happens frequently enough that after a while, it got on my nerves.
Nobody make a wish.
I wish I had one of those sweet monster trucks.
Do you pay attention to anything at all, ever?
I'm not even sure what Tucker's major obstacle is. He is an only child who comes from a relatively normal home life, so if I had to guess, I'd say his insecurities come from school, being mocked and shunned by his peers or completely ignored by them. I did notice that the one consistent insecurity Tucker seems to have is being ignored or left behind. He gets really self-conscious about that. It doesn't evolve all that much, so there's not much for me to say about it beyond this, but I'm working with what I've got. My trouble pinpointing a meaningful arc for Tucker compared to his friends might come down to the fact that he doesn't have that many focus episodes. There's only about 3 where the adversary was his to fight and overcome. Tucker mostly serves as comic relief, with a snarky one-liner or moment of physical punishment for various reasons. And until recently, it was pretty much unheard of for the comic relief character to get deaf because character development isn't funny. All that said, said, I do like Tucker. I think he is an essential member of Team Phantom, and despite how opportunist he can be, is there for Danny and Sam when it really counts, which is what saves him in my eyes. The last character I want to talk about here is Danny's older sister, Jasmine. Now, Jazz is an interesting case because she starts the series as the pushy, know-it-all sister who thinks she's older than she actually is and wants to be treated as such, only giving her family the time of day when she thinks she can analyze them psychologically.
But you're only 16. Biologically, but psychologically, I'm an adult.
I was the only kid there.
Well, that and your sister, who thinks she's a grown-up.
But like Sam and Tucker, she's fiercely protective of Danny, likely due to them growing up in such an unstable household. And for a while, it seems like Jazz is going to express that by acting superior and uptight for the whole show. Until they do something very interesting. About halfway through the first season, Jazz discovers Danny's secret.
Danny?
Seeing that her brother is going through something difficult that he really can't talk about, she understands him a lot better. She still wants to help him, but in a much different way. When she sees Danny isn't comfortable sharing his secret, she still looks out for him, covering for him when he runs off to a fight, and not telling anyone what she knows. Not even Danny. It adds an extra layer to the series. Jazz could have spent the entire show as the superior big sister who doesn't know as much as she thinks she does, but instead, she learns more than anyone thinks and handles it in a truly mature way. She'll even loosen up a bit as the show goes on, and her and Danny's relationship will only get stronger. Back to the show itself, despite the fact that Danny Phantom is at its core an episodic superhero comedy, there is a decent amount of continuity throughout the show, and changes do have a lasting impact. Because of that, each season of the show is different from the other. So I thought to talk about the show properly, it'd be best to go over each season individually to see how it evolves. So naturally, the best place to start is...
Danny Phantom.
Season 1 starts out in the typical way a TV show does, getting to know the characters, the world, and the adventures contained in it. At first, the ghosts are just large obstacles for our heroes to topple over, from the vengeful lunch lady, to Technus, the ghost that can possess and control technology, to the most feared ghost hunter, Skulker. In these early days, Danny also slowly adjusts to his powers, but doesn't have much control over them yet.
Cool! How'd I do that?
Getting him into embarrassing situations and getting increasingly frustrated with trying and failing to balance his dual life as Fenton and Phantom. He's much more prone to shortcuts at this point in the show, and it always comes with a bit of ghost-related karma. Over time, the ghostly threats become more specialized to whatever Danny and the others are going through in an episode, feeding on or manipulating emotions and forcing them into more situations where they have to examine their priorities. Like with Spectra, a ghost who disguises herself as the school's guidance counselor to feed on the insecurities of kids, or Desiree, a genie ghost who grants people's wishes with a ghoulish twist. This season could have just followed the same formula of something new comes through the recently opened portal and fights ensue. But we get to go a bit deeper, not just by having the ghosts be more specialized, but by having Dan and the others travel through the portal themselves into the ghost zone. A full dimension littered with floating doorways attached to other realms that some ghosts call their homes, with its own laws of physics, mainly that ghosts can be hurt in the ghost zone, but humans can't. It's a very surreal and creative environment that seems to have no real end, so they can keep expanding on it and adding more cool and exotic locations as the show requires. In the episode Prisoner of Love, through a set of circumstances, Danny winds up in a ghost zone prison inhabited by all of his past enemies, which wasn't that many at the time because this was like episode 8. Might have been better to save that one for later in the season. In Fright Night, we learn that the Ghost Zone has its own history and ancient enemies, the Fright Night being one of the most powerful and feared of them all, and one of my personal favorite ghosts on the show. I mean, come on, look at that guy. How is that not amazing? A lot of the ghosts in this season become recurring villains. There's not really any one-and-dones in this group. Even enemies that don't get dedicated episodes, like the famous Box Ghost, will make regular appearances for scenes where they need a ghost for Danny to punch. Most of Danny's foes fall into the category of recurring but easily overcomable obstacles, with two exceptions. The first is Valerie Gray. At first, Valerie is just one of Danny's classmates, one of the popular girls who won't give the boys the time of day. But in Shades of Grey, Valerie's life is slowly ruined by ghosts, so she wants to, wipe them out, becoming a ghost hunter, and turns out she's pretty darn good at it. Valerie is definitely a fan favorite, and I think that comes down to two things. One, Chris Emmer's voice work was so amazing, and two, that of all the more ephemeral threats on the show, even the more sympathetic ones, Valerie was much more down to earth. Even if this is an extreme solution to her hatred, you understand why she sees ghosts so poorly, and how quickly her family winds up in borderline poverty has her going through a lot of difficult times on top of it. She's got a great antagonistic relationship with Danny, which adds another layer of complexity because now Danny has another person in his life who wants to wipe out his ghost half. Her story is compelling, and the possibilities for her future on the show are vast. But the biggest villain introduced in season 1 is Vlad Masters, a college friend of Danny's parents who assisted in the first prototype of the ghost portal during their studies. However, that portal backfired and caused a different accident that hospitalized Vlad and had some other familiar side effects. Vlad Masters, alias Plasmius, is another ghost hybrid, except he has many more years of experience than Danny, and that's clear in their very first fight where he wipes the floor with him in like a minute. Vlad has not only spent the last 20 years mastering his powers, but using them to amass power and wealth. While Vlad's motives for gaining more and more power just seems to be out of some sixth sense of superiority now that he's more than just human, there's also a less subtle motivation to get revenge on Jack for causing an accident in the first place and presumably losing his chance to date Maddie, an obsession that only gets creepier as the show goes on.
Now say it again the way I programmed you to.
Jack Fenton is an idiot. I am glad I serve you. Dude, that's creepy.
Basically, every temptation Danny has had to use his powers to cheat, Vlad has done dozens of times over. He's a criminal mastermind and brilliant tactician, using all of his available resources for his own goals of acquiring even more power. It's even implied that a lot of the ghost attacks in the series up to his debut in episode 7 were hired by him to test out Jack's ghost hunting skills. However, his course changes slightly once he encounters Danny, the only other person in the world like him. Indeed, he does attempt to recruit Danny to his side, and you think that with all the struggles Danny's had with controlling his powers and how much trouble he gets in with his family, that there'd be some temptation to take Vlad up on his offer, but he doesn't consider it. Not for a moment. He stands his ground against Vlad, and it works. They reach an agreement to keep each other's secret identities, but become bitter rivals. Vlad makes several appearances after this, usually trapping the Fentons into a situation that he has full control over without their knowledge, and trying to break apart the family or gain something from them. It creates this very fascinating antagonism. Vlad's episodes were always some of the best ones. They tended to have big challenges for Danny and his family, and it led to some really great team-ups mixed with Danny trying to keep his secret. Vlad's brilliance was his advantage, and his arrogance was his downfall. As the episodes go on and more ghost attacks keep happening, the people of Amity Park take notice. Ghosts go from an idea that would be laughed at and mocked relentlessly if people insisted they were real, like Danny's parents, to an accepted reality in this world, and one that people had to deal with on a near daily basis. Unfortunately, Danny kind of becomes the poster child for this epidemic. There's a ghost problem in Amity Park, and Danny is the biggest problem of them all. And yes, I know this is sort of another Spider-Man parallel. So in season 1, Danny has to navigate learning how to control his new powers, keeping his identity a secret, fighting off ghosts with a variety of destructive powers, the average hardships of just being a teenager, and being hunted down as public enemy number 1. This is the kind of thing that made Danny Phantom stand out from other action cartoons I'd seen. Things just kept escalating, and the setting of the series changed with each development. Not many episodes went by until something else shook things up again. It kept things really interesting in a show that probably could have gotten by just fine with the same formula over and over again. There are a ton of standout episodes in season 1, and a lot of them I've already mentioned, but some of the others include Fanning the Flames, outside of having a feast of shipping bait, introduce hands down the most popular ghost on the show, Ember McLean, a rocker ghost who gets more powerful the more adoring fans she has. A really great concept for a villain that got a little too true to life because boy did people get real weird about Ember real quick. Public Enemies, the main turning point for when the threat of ghosts and Danny's reputation changed significantly, family, the $1 Million Ghost, which to me acts as a spiritual sequel to Public Enemies, following up on the wider reaction to ghosts. There's a cool appearance by Vlad, and Jack has to team up with Danny without realizing it's his kid. There's a lot of great dynamics with this one, and some fun parody with the other ghost hunters who roll into town. And the episode that acts as the season 1 finale, Control Freaks. While the episode lacks a sense of finality, bringing an entirely new villain and not really wrapping up any major arcs from the first season, it's still a standout adventure, featuring Freak Show, a human ringleader who possesses an ancient staff that can control ghosts, and Danny winds up under his spell. I'm already a big fan of mind control episodes, or characters being forced to be bad and needing to break free. This episode has some of the most dramatic and intense moments of the first season. It's a fan favorite, and it's easy to see why. But Control Freaks might not feel like a finale because we only had to wait one more week until... Season 2 attempted to be bigger and better than the first in every possible way, with lots of returning ghosts, a few new ones, shifting the status quo a couple times from where season 1 left off, and watching Danny slowly grow into a fully fledged hero. The season opener, Memory Blank, is a good throwback to how the series began, and shows how it will continue to have ever-present change. We get to learn more about how Danny got his powers. The events of the episode lead to Danny starting at square one, until he's able to regain who he was and who he's becoming by the end. Signified by this cool new insignia he gets on his costume. I love it, I have it on a t-shirt, I get comments about it all the time, it's that cool.
Did you do something to my costume?
No, it's always been like that.
The townspeople of Amity Park also slowly start to realize that Danny is a protector rather than a threat, since he's always on the scene to protect people and send the ghosts back where they came from. Though he still has his fair share of detractors, his parents and Valerie still want to wipe him out, but he also gains more confidence outside of having his powers or hiding behind his alias. There are plenty of scenarios in season 2 where Danny is forced to take charge as Danny Fenton, or without his powers to rely on. Like in Pirate Radio, where Danny rallies his fellow students to save their parents against a ghostly threat he can't take on alone. Or in Micromanagement, where Danny and Dash get shrunk down and have to work together to get back to normal while Danny's powers are slowly shorting out and Skulker is on their tail. This one I think is interesting because Dash is physically stronger while Danny isn't, but Dash doesn't feel any sense of dominance because he's with Danny Phantom. He's in a scary situation where his local superhero can't protect him. So Danny has to be encouraging to his bully and bring out the strength in both of them. It's pretty clever. Or Identity Crisis, where Danny tries to split himself in half so his ghost hunting doesn't interfere with spending time with his friends as a regular kid. But it becomes clear right away how incomplete Danny is when he's just a ghost or just a boy. Both sides make him whole, and he realizes that more this season. Another thing that gets shaken up in the season is that Jazz comes clean to Danny that she knows his secret, and the relationship changes a bit after that. The episode that really explores this is Secret Weapon, which could come off as mischaracterizing Jazz. This mature honor student is messing up ghost missions and doing such lackluster research to ridiculous comedic effect. And while I think they definitely make Jazz a little too naive in this episode, I think it also shows that just because Jazz is brilliant doesn't mean she knows and can do everything. She is the star student who has the approval of every teacher and parent, but that's just the adults. You ever notice that Jazz doesn't have any friends?
At all?
She has her weak points, and this is the kind of episode to show that. She's an overachiever who can sometimes go too far. Jazz has got some ghost fighting skills, but at the end of the day, this is Danny's thing. And they reach a good point where Jazz decides to support her brother from the sidelines, and Danny can appreciate her more. Having Jazz on their side does give the group an important ally who can help out when she's needed. There was also the subplot where Danny starts developing feelings for Valerie, which I get it. It's a classic hero conflict of falling in love with the enemy. Batman and Catwoman, Spider-Man and Black Cat, this is a tried and true trope. This was never a relationship I was all that invested in. I just couldn't see Valerie getting past her hatred of ghosts if she ever found out what Danny was, but it does lead to some tough choices for the both of them, and some good dramatic moments. It did clearly touch a lot of viewers, and that usually means you're doing something right, so kudos. Some other standout episodes include The Fenton Menace, where Jazz tries to help Danny when he gets overstressed about ghosts, leading to both parties trying to look out for their sibling, while also having to be incredibly dishonest with with them. It was the swan song of Jazz not telling Danny she knows, and it's a good one. Masters of All Time, where Danny goes back in time to prevent the accident that gave Vlad his powers, which does some pretty fun, if somewhat expected stuff with this what-if scenario. But the highlight is the drama it creates, and how even though Jack and Maddie fall into the trope of dim-witted husband and much smarter wife, they are perfect for each other, and their lives are better together. And kindred spirits, where it's revealed Vlad's been attempting to clone Danny. Oh boy, we could spend a while on that one, but this video is packed enough as it is. And one of those attempts is Danielle, one of the more compelling side characters and an instant fan favorite. People really love Danielle. If Danny Phantom was more successful in Nickelodeon's eyes, she probably could have gotten a spin-off. The true standouts of season 2, though, are the event episodes. Double-length, large-scale episodes that Nickelodeon would hype up like mad. They used to do this with a lot of their shows in the 2000s. I miss it so much. Each of these could warrant their own video, since they all have larger challenges, more ambitious animation, and deeper character work than most of the other episodes, but we're gonna go over them as quickly as we can. The first was Rainstorm, and it's the kind of story you'd expect from an event-level episode. The gang faces the most powerful ghost in the history of the Ghost Zone, King Pariah Dark, who tries to regain his powers and take over both worlds. The entire town gets involved because it's slowly put under siege by this threat. There's a lot of alliances of convenience between Danny and pretty much all of his rivals and enemies up to this point. Everyone's running around in close quarters trying to fight while keeping their secrets from each other. Danny gets this badass mech suit and it's the show's biggest crime that he never uses it again. It's a straightforward event story, but has a lot of the exciting moments and dynamics that make a story like this so fun to watch. The season 2 finale, Reality Trip, has another tried and true approach to an animated event episode, Summer Vacation. Freak Show returns, this time equipped with something that's totally supposed to be the Infinity Gauntlet, but this was 2006, so unless you were a really big comic nerd, you probably didn't notice how much of a ripoff it is. But the biggest obstacle is that Danny's secret is revealed to the world, and he now has to travel the country to stop Freak Show without a way to hide anymore. The fact that Danny is outed in the middle of such a dire situation is really what makes this episode work. It proves nearly all of Danny's fears right about what would happen if people found out he was part ghost, but there are some pleasant surprises as well, from his classmates and even his parents. Now, yes, because we have a reality-bending weapon in play here, all this can be reversed by the end, but I get it. Danny keeping his secret offers more fun conflict than Danny being jumped all the time for being a ghost. But aside from that, it's got some fun locations and clever twists. It takes advantage of this conflict before they undo everything. Yeah, it's good. But neither of those compare to the ultimate enemy. Yeah, you were all waiting for this one. I'm sorry it took so long. If you were to ask anyone who has watched Danny Phantom, what is the best episode of the show, this will always be the answer. Favorite could be any of them, but the absolute best, no contest, no debate, it's Ultimate Enemy. Clockwork, a ghost master of time, hunts Danny down to prevent a terrible future from occurring that's caused by Danny himself, who grows up to become, in Clockwork's words, the most evil ghost on the planet. There is just so much that works about Ultimate Enemy and makes it so incredible. The fun they have with creating futuristic versions of the ghosts we already know, the drama and hopelessness of this future possibly being molded in real time by Danny's actions in the present, the origin story of Dark Danny being easily the darkest thing this show has ever come up with, but is treated with the weight and pathos it deserves. It's an episode that has so much potential, and while it doesn't have time to go as deep with this idea as it could, it expertly uses small moments to convey incredible implications and drama. There are single lines uttered in this episode that speak volumes and absolutely break my heart. It's a time travel story that shows both the dread and hope in the idea that nothing is set in stone. The future is always in flux, and it's our choices that will mold it until it hardens into the present.
I guess the future isn't as set in stone as you think it is.
The only downside to The Ultimate Enemy is that the show never got better than this. Oh, they tried. There were episodes with strong themes, dark moments, and large threats, but this was the peak of Danny Phantom, and they never quite reached it again. Season 2 as a whole was much more ambitious, creative, and daring than the first. It cemented Danny Phantom as something truly special, and there was even more to come. And I can only imagine how much better it'll get from here. What could possibly go wrong?
Danny Phantom.
Okay, I think I'm gonna see a dip in my audience engagement right around here, because this is where I say that I think season 3 is fine. Is it as good as the first 2 seasons? Heck no. Are there glaring tonal issues and strange choices in dropping certain plot lines? Absolutely. But I never felt this overwhelming disappointment or betrayal that a lot of other fans seem to have at the show's 3rd and final season. Right off the bat, there's definitely a change in direction and focus, which I don't think is that noticeable if you watch the series in a random order or far apart from each other, but if you're really familiar with the first 2 seasons, or marathon them like some weirdo YouTuber, the changes become much more obvious. Which is a shame because the season premiere, Eye for an Eye, starts off promisingly. Danny and Vlad's rivalry escalates to the point that Vlad becomes mayor of Amity Park.
What is it you young folks say? Don't hate, congratulate. What do I care? Go ahead and hate.
Yeah, there's a lot of petty squabbling in this episode, and the humor doesn't always land, but the idea is a really good one. Vlad in politics is such a great match, and the fact that it wasn't undone by the end of the episode was a major change in the status quo. This isn't isolated either. There's a few big changes in season 3 that have long-term effects, just like in the previous seasons. The lore behind the Ghost Stone is expanded, Danny and Sam's relationship starts to progress to a point where they're getting closer to being honest about their feelings, and Danny gains ice powers. This addition is kind of divisive in the fanbase. As a teen, I thought it was really cool, but admittedly, as an adult, it doesn't quite match up with his other powers and is a little too OP. The adventures, though, are definitely more self-contained, and there is a lack of attention to plotlines from the previous seasons, which is the main complaint with this season, and considering stuff like Valerie's ghost hunting life, Vlad's ghostly alliances, or the possibility that Phantom could return were so intriguing to fans, I can understand that they were completely dropped or ignored leaves a bad taste in viewers' mouths. If I were to sum up the biggest hindrance I saw in season 3, it would be a lack of long-term development. Choices are made with the story or characters, often not with any deeper motivation or progression in mind, but rather as a quick and easy way to jumpstart a conflict or to set up a cool action scene. And there are some fun conflicts and exciting action, I will not lie, but it seems more... how do I put this? Fleeting? Like, a character will mention a personal problem related to the ghost of the week in the most vague sense, mainly as a way to set up the ghost, rather than actually work through the problem through the oncoming conflict. They just punch a ghost a few times and learn a valuable lesson at the end. Apparently. I think I missed that part. The new ghosts introduced this season are vastly different too, much more monstrous and representative of a force of nature rather than a full character. This didn't bother me as a kid, but watching this again, the contrast is pretty obvious and speaks to the change in direction here. But I do still think some of these designs are freaking cool, except Vortex. I mean, come on, a tornado with a leather jacket? That's just dumb. For me, though, none of this is enough to hate the season. Where season 3 succeeds in my eyes is when they take full advantage of these new larger-than-life conflicts and make our heroes fight harder than ever before to overcome it. There's not much satisfying character progression in these kinds of stories, at least not for Danny, but that's because all the progress was done in the previous 2 seasons. This is an area where watching in order pays off. Seeing the progression of Danny becoming such a strong and confident hero, only challenged by such huge conflicts or adversaries throwing him off guard, is incredibly satisfying. Episodes like Urban Jungle, Frightmare, and Claw of the Wild are some of my favorite episodes in the entire show for this very reason. The situations feel so dire and uncertain, and watching how Danny and others will face that is great television. You'd think I wouldn't have any standout episodes for this segment based on the season's reputation, but there's quite a few, like Infinite Realms, an episode that explores more about how the Ghost Zone relates to the human world that turns into this big fetch quest between Team Phantom and Plasmius that I really enjoy. Boxed Up Fury, where the box ghost steals Pandora's box, which is such an amazing idea. I cannot believe it took them over 40 episodes to do it, but luckily they really take advantage of it when they do. And Urban Jungle, which sees Amity Park overtaken by the plant ghost Undergrowth and Danny developing his freeze powers to combat it. This one probably does have a lot of the common complaints with the season, but I think the crew went all out with this one and it really left an impression on me. It felt so challenging and uncertain and eventually triumphant. There's a reason this episode got its own video game. Then there's Forever Phantom and Destabilize, the episodes that probably feel the most like traditional episodes of the show. Forever Phantom sees a shape-shifting ghost trying to mess with Danny's reputation. It's a good look into the pressure Danny feels at being a recognized public figure with a ghostly adversary to complement it. A simple but solid episode, and it gave us one of my favorite ghosts on the show. I'm not kidding. Here's my Amorpho fan arc circa 2007. And Destabilize has everything the rest of the season was missing. Focus on the return of Danielle as she tries to save her own life. It has Vlad at perhaps his most devious this season, and brings in Valerie to challenge her perception of the ghost she hunts in really compelling ways. I do feel it's worth noting that this episode is the only one in the show written by Amy Keating Rogers. Friendship is Magic fans need no further confirmation to understand why this is arguably the best episode of the season. The only real fault it has is that it sets up a lot of possibilities for future stories, but it's the penultimate episode of the series. What a waste. Season 3 to me is less overall bad and more tonally schizophrenic. For every episode with a genuinely terrifying new force that challenges our heroes more than most, there's one that wastes a cool idea or opportunity for growth. For every episode that does something new and inventive with established characters, there's another that does something tired, cliche, or just straight up unnecessary. It's not nearly as great as the first 2 seasons, and I could see some choices they made throughout frustrating or disappointing hardcore fans, because a few of them bothered me too. But I don't think it's this affront to the show's legacy so many claim it is, or that it's devoid of any quality. I have seen far more egregious seasons of TV shows, even at this point in time. My first superhero love was the Powerpuff Girls, whose seasonal rot was significantly worse than the Ghost Boys, at least in my opinion. But as I'm sure you all know, there's one other thing we need to talk about before we can wrap this up. To many fans, the greatest crime committed by season 3, the series finale, Phantom Planet. Now, like the other special episodes, Phantom Planet could make for a video all its own. Addressing all the different controversies alone could have us here for another hour. But for the sake of your time and my sanity, I'm gonna try to condense this discussion as much as I can. So if it feels like I'm painting in broad strokes, I apologize, but I don't want to get wrapped up in the backlash of this finale too much. Phantom Planet to me kind of sums up the entirety of season 3. There are some really weird choices made by the characters. It focuses on the scale of the threat rather than if it makes any sense, and yeah, overall isn't great, but it's not devoid of anything resembling quality, season cool opportunities, or any good cathartic moments. So what's the big bad this time? The overwhelming threat that our heroes are going to have to overcome in this big final adventure. Well, what's bigger than a giant indestructible asteroid hurtling towards Earth? That is also, by the way, impervious to ghosts. They introduce ghost kryptonite in the very last episode. Yeah, that's pretty weird, not gonna lie. But it's not an impossible thing to make work. Making the threat monstrous yet inanimate allows for more time to spend with our established cast before we have to say goodbye. The main conflict isn't really the Disasteroid though. Yes, that's what it's called, I know, but the decision for Danny to give up his powers. This decision is what most of the special revolves around, and what I want to mainly talk about. On the one hand, it's kind of a foregone conclusion. I have no trouble believing that if given the opportunity, Danny would get rid of his ghost half. So when he's presented with a chance to do so, and he's reminded of just how much grief being half ghost has caused him, he takes it. On the other hand, the trigger for this decision is pulled by Vlad's new ghost hunting team, Masters Blasters, who I cannot stand in this. They're absolutely ridiculous, even by comic book parody standards, and their antics in humiliating Danny at his own game make the first 11 minutes of this finale agonizing. If people didn't see the rest of the stuff I'm about to talk about because of this, I would completely understand. But the most contentious part of this finale is probably everyone else's reaction to Danny being human again. On the surface, it does come off as selfish. They're all disappointed that Danny gave up this part of himself that made their lives so exciting, but has been a constant struggle for him. Now, the dialogue could be worded better because it can be read as them only caring about Danny Phantom, not Fenton. But I'm gonna make an argument for the sentiment expressed by Danny's loved ones. For one, all of them knew and loved Danny before he became half ghost. This is very well established, and they have all seen the kind of person he's become since getting his powers. Sam has a spat with Danny a few days into this, and this scene is often used as both a criticism for this episode and Sam, but honestly, watching the whole show again, I think it's a great moment for Sam to help Danny take a look at himself. Why being an average kid doesn't suit him anymore, what he's accomplished, and what removing the hometown hero means for Amity Park. Despite all the other problems with the dialogue, this line in particular really brings that home.
I'll always be your friend, Danny, and I'll always be there for you, but I can't live life just sitting on the sidelines. I'm surprised you think you can.
He's out of line, but he's right.
The only defense they have without Danny is Vlad, who, in true Vlad fashion, extorts this chance to hold the world hostage in exchange for his ghostly services, outing himself to the world, thinking he's won. And I love this. As much as I cannot stand Vlad and his cronies in the first half of this is him finally showing his true colors, dropping every manipulative advantage he had to deliver the final blow. But when it all blows up in his face, he can't go back. Everything crumbles around him and he has no one to blame but himself. Represented in this moment with Jack, Vlad's biggest supporter finally sees how despicable he truly is. Not as a ghost, but as a person. So, what happens?
You wouldn't turn your back on an old friend, would you?
An old friend? No. You? Yes.
That is one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. As things get more dire, Danny realizes that the others are right. He can't just sit on the sidelines if there's even the slightest chance he can do something to save them. It's an instinct at this point, one that he's been sharpening over the course of the series. Like I said near the beginning of the video, being Danny Phantom gave Danny a purpose, a direction in life he didn't have before. Going through hardships, yes, but also having the chance to do incredible things. He's seen other worlds. He's been to space.
You traveled through time, for crying out loud, twice!
It's the same reason why I was never a fan of Tony Stark trying to retire as Iron Man. Yes, these mantles are stressful, painful, borderline traumatic, and there's nothing wrong with wanting a more healthy balance between the life of a hero and just being a person. But giving it up entirely is not the answer. Not for Tony, and certainly not for Danny. It results in feeling empty, because he would not be the person who values the things he loves in life so much without the perspective given to him by being the one to defend them. Now, some of the events after this are ridiculous. The absurd way Danny gets his powers back, this convoluted plan to turn the entire Earth intangible, there's a lot of eye rolling in the second half. But what does shine through is Danny's arc coming full circle. He's doing something he never aspired to until it was thrust into his lap. Change the world, make a difference, uniting the world of humans and ghosts in a common mission to save them all. At the end of it all, that still shines through for me, and it's what ultimately saves this finale from being an absolute blunder. Well, that and that scene with Jack and Vlad, oh my god, that was pure gold. Because of how conflicting Phantom Planet is as a whole, I could see people coming out with a divisive mindset. Some might sit there perplexed as Danny officially revealing his secret identity is tacked on, or that Tucker is suddenly the mayor of Amity Park. Like, what the heck? But some might feel warm and prideful as Danny finally grows into who he was always meant to be and is accepted by others entirely for who he's become. As much as I truly wish that Phantom Planet was better as a whole and didn't tarnish the show's reputation, I do fall into the latter category. If Danny Phantom is a teenage coming-of-age story, this is where he grows into a better version of himself, ready and confident to start the next phase of his life with the people he loves and whatever that will have in store. Unfortunately, that is a story we were not destined to see ourselves. The fact that season 3 is only 13 episodes as opposed to 20 should have been a sign that the show was on its last legs. It's easy to mourn what could have been, and long to see more of this thing that had so much potential, but regardless of how you feel about what we got, there is some sense of gratitude to be had that we got a finale to Danny Phantom at all. A lot of cult classic shows at this time weren't as lucky. The Ghost Boy may have disappeared from our screens, but he certainly wasn't forgotten, as many still look back fondly and actively enjoy Danny Phantom to this day, including me, as you can tell. Overall, Danny Phantom is... Man, I still love the show. I'm not gonna lie, guys, when I decided to go into this marathon, I was expecting some of the magic to be lost, or the show to be not as good as I remember. While I did find some cringy jokes, poorly aged archetypes, weak stories, and some lost potential to really push the envelope, I think I came out of this with an even higher appreciation for the show, just in a different way. As a kid, I found the show to be cool, creative, a little dark at times, and just overall exciting with a fun group of characters. But now, despite whatever faults it may have, I can't help but admire all the dedication that went into this series. How it's a send-up to classic superhero stories while being something all its own. The standout design work, the phenomenal voice acting, the witty remarks, the creative stories, the fascinating world building, the ambition to have meaningful long-term development, and the thoughtful work put into their cast cast of characters. Even with a video this long, I think I'm only scratching the surface. There's a lot of other pros and cons in this series that could be spent discussing for hours. It's part of the reason why the show has a thriving fan base 20 years later and has just as many critics as it does fanatics, or both in some cases. But I wanted to make this both broad and comprehensive, cover as much of the show as I could without going down any major rabbit holes. But I totally could've. Before we conclude though, if you'll allow me to ramble a little bit more, it's time to reveal my...
Danny Phantom.
I mean, I could be obvious and pick The Ultimate Enemy because it's just that good, and yeah, of course it's my favorite. But to make this more interesting, my favorite episode, that isn't Ultimate Enemy, is probably Bitter Reunions. I think it was the first episode to expand Danny Phantom beyond being a Monster of the Week show. The introduction of Lad gives us more of a history of Danny's parents, someone who's like Danny, but who he can never really connect with because their ideals are so different, and he was the first villain that, to me, felt like a legitimate threat. To this day, Plasmius is one of my all-time favorite villains, and I've watched his introductory episode more than most on the show, so that's probably my favorite. After Ultimate Enemy. There was so much potential with Danny Phantom, and while they tapped into quite a bit of it during its run, it's such a shame it wasn't more successful at the time, and that certain people allegedly made bad business decisions that sank the ship.
I don't want to mention any names. Follow my eyes.
3 seasons and 53 episodes is a solid run, but in the 2000s, that was modest at best. I know we're in an era where we're kind of sick of reboots and remakes, but if any series is ripe for reimagining, it's Danny Phantom. How are we not on our 4th Phantom reboot by now? A lot of the show's problems can be tied back to it being a product of its time. I would love to see some new Danny Phantom stories, even if it's an unusual way, but alas, such a thing has yet to happen. Huh. Well, looks like we're getting one more video for this celebration. Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what you thought of Danny Phantom in the comments below. That's why the series is called Let's Talk About. I want to give a very special thanks to my patrons who help support my content, including Jinx Productions and Wait in the Wings. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to check out any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys next time.